Okay. Sagama Miso Joe, LLD, CM, is the author of Munjij Becomes a Man and An Aboriginal Chief's Journey. He has been the district traditional chief of Moy Bukek First Nation since 1983, appointed by the late Grand Chief Donald Marshall Michel Joe. Michel Joe is considered the spiritual chief of the Mi'kmaq of Newfoundland and Labrador. Sheila O'Neill, BA, BEd, is from Kippens, Newfoundland, and is a member of the Halibu Mi'kmaq First Nation. Sheila is a drum carrier and carries many teachings passed down by respected elders. As a founding member and past president of the Newfoundland Aboriginal Women's Network, NON, she has been part of a grassroots movement of empowerment of Indigenous women within the island portion of Newfoundland and Labrador. She lives in St. John's. I now pass the evening over to Sagama Miso Joe and to Sheila O'Neill and their presentation, My Indian, the importance of retelling history from an Indigenous perspective.
Thank you, Judge Jai. The only way I know how to say it, Judge Jai. And no, it's a pleasure to be on here and to talk about our story, even though it's historical fiction. I think it's still, in some ways, able to tell part of the history that we've lived by, and also because we didn't know enough about Sylvester Joe to start with. So we had to create a person to be able to tell that story to and about. And that's where it comes from. And for my part, I've always wanted to follow Sylvester's journey, and I just happened to meet Sheila at Powwow in, I think, 2014 or something like that, or earlier, and asked her to join me on this journey of trying to recreate.
Okay, I got it, Mom.
Hello?
I think we're good.
Okay, okay, you're on then.
I am listening intently.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when Chief, I think it was, well, I've known Chief for a while, but I think it was the 2017 powwow. And Chief said, I've got a project if you're interested. So we agreed to meet on his patio, and we sat down on the back patio, and I took a pen and paper, and he started talking about this idea he had, and I realized that he had the entire outline for a book. And so our adventure began. Kind of always interesting and always you know, a good experience, but very difficult to work together, living in two separate communities, Chief being in Maubukek and Conn River on southern Newfoundland, and I'm here in St. John's. But we worked our way through the ideas. We did receive a grant from Historical Sites, a writer's grant to help us along the way. And we took the story that Chief had and hired some researchers to help us to really flesh out the character of Sylvester Joe, to find anything we could, any evidence of him in history. And of course, he is a person of national historical significance for having been one of the first Mi'kmaq guides. And we soon realized that we pretty much had exhausted whatever we could find about Sylvester Joe. So we took the story and we divided it into two halves. The first half is Sylvester Joe growing up on the land and giving him the teachings and the experiences that would make him credible as a character as he joined Cormac on his journey in 1822.
So there is a story, a start of the story, and you know, we grew up knowing about the story about Sylvester and Cormac, and never talked about it a lot, but we certainly knew about it. And as you know, our history was never written by our own people. It was always written by the colonizers. And through that, the discussion with a lot of people, I think it's time that Aboriginal people start to write their own stories And whether it's some for that to be fiction and connected to history, I think we need to look at that as well. And even when you look at the front of the book, even the front of the book tells the story of the clothing of the time, the bundles, the boots, they're different in clothing. And the boots that Cormac wore probably come from someplace on the mainland, or as they call back prior 1949 Canada. And Sylvester skin boots would have been made by our own people, a difference. And those are the things that are different. And the pack and the bundle and the heel spears are all part of our history, our way of living. And we never always had muskets. We had bows and arrows, but when the Europeans arrived, of course, they brought those things to us and we adapted to them. And so we tried to put as much into this book about the environment and the way of living on the land as we could, include the language, our language, and tell a story as best we could, following the Cormac journal, page by page, and trying to imagine what Sylvester would have been doing at the time and how he looked after Cormac. And so it is a way of telling his story. And that's the fictional part, because nobody knows what Cormac was thinking. We just have to rely on, I guess, our stories growing up here from our own elders of what it was like living on the land during that time. So that's pretty much what's in the book. And we tried to write it in a way that would be easy read for high school or younger people to read. And the nice part of this, we've got several callbacks from young students and now doing book reviews with this book. And I have to remind everybody at all times, it's an historical fiction. And it tells a good story, but it also tells the truth in terms of history. You know, we were treated as history by people like Cornwallis and other things. But that's all part of this little book that we have here. Sheila, do you have anything to add?
It feels kind of strange to be doing this, getting questions throughout. I think as we were writing, we were figuring out where the place for this book. It became obvious to me that this could become a curriculum resource. And we worked with Breakwater Books, of course, who had a fabulous team over there, fabulous editor, nothing but the highest of praise. And as we were writing, it became obvious that this is something that could be used in the schools. And I know that there's a big call for that right now for authentic Indigenous writing. And so as we were writing, we stuck true to that, and every opportunity we could to include examples of the language or traditional teachings or traditional events or history, we added that as we went, and really wanted to make this something that could go into the schools. As Chief said, we're getting quite a bit of interest, and I've had a couple of great reviews from young students, one as young as 10, who did a video report on the book and also a mobile, and also from another recently turned 13-year-old student who read it all in one sitting and was very pleased to hear that Sylvester had his own voice. So you know, for me personally, that's the best and highest kind of honor we can get. Knowing that our intended audience is reading it and hearing and seeing the book through the way we intended it to be. Chief alluded to the cover of the book. We engaged Mi'kmaq artist Jerry Evans, and Jerry researched the clothing and so on of the time. And we weren't really sure if that was going to be the cover, but we really thought it brought authenticity to the story, that this was what you would expect to see. You know, even the type of trees and the water and so on are all what you would see on this land. We also, I guess, Chief, we should probably talk about the title too, because that's a question we get asked quite a bit.
My Indian, well, I think we struggled with a name to find for this. It was Sylvester, it was Silver, it was a journey, but I think Sheila came up with the name My Indian, even though it probably wasn't the right name at the time. But I think once you read the inside of the book, you'll find that it's an appropriate name because of Cormac always referring to Sylvester as My Indian. And in the book, you'll see that at one time, Sylvester, I guess my grandfather would call, he got saucy to a white man, and he said, "I'm nobody's Indian. You can't own a person. You could own a dog or cattle or sheep, but you can't own a person." And I think that was part of the stories that we heard growing up about those kind of remarks. So My Indian seemed to be an appropriate name. And I think as people got to read the book and see what it's all about, they sort of accepted that we weren't trying to be nasty in any way or racist in any way or anything else. Just trying to tell a story around that title, and it continues today. That's not the end of it. 200 years ago, it continues.
Yeah, in Cormac's original journal, he referred to Sylvester as My Indian 27 times, I think, right from the very first page. So we really wanted to reclaim the narrative. And in fact, Breakwater suggested that we explain our rationale because once we pitched the idea for the title and why, of course, they came right on board. But we felt it was important because it is maybe a little controversial, but it makes a statement. And also, as we said, we wanted to reclaim that story. We wanted the story to be told through Sylvester's voice and bring that out there. The second part of the book, as Chief said, we followed Cormac's journal by fairly closely by what was happening and where they were on the land. And we wanted to make sure that the audience, as I said, would understand that Sylvester was really being guided by his elders and by his upbringing. And that, in a sense, apologies for those of you who haven't read it yet, please do. I hope you do, and I hope you enjoy it. He was kind of acting as a double agent because he did make an agreement with Cormac to get him across the land safely. But based on the advice and requests from his elders in the community, he didn't lead Cormac to his brothers and sisters, the Beothuk. In fact, he was making sure that they did not connect, and that's a big part of the story, and also the reclaiming of the narrative that the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk were not necessarily enemies, and that Sylvester, under the guidance of his elders, was making sure that no harm came to them from this white man.
Yeah, I think if anyone have a chance to see Chris Elward's video that went across Newfoundland, all the way from Newfoundland to Labrador, and the question got asked, and it always came back the same, that there was, we feel related, we feel close, and somehow connected to the Beothuk people. And I'm sure that in history that there would have been fights between all people, not just Mi'kmaq or Beothuk. And if there was, people brought over from Canada at the time, as they used to say, with Mi'kmaq people. As I've been told many times, we all look alike anyway. And it could have been from Mi'kmaq, it could have been from Quebec, it could have been from anywhere. Not saying that it wasn't Mi'kmaq, but it sure as hell never brought over 20,000 Mi'kmaq people by the French to kill off the Beothuk people. Even if they had half a dozen, that might have been pushing it. But you got to keep in mind too as well that just because our people wasn't seen along the coast when the Europeans arrived doesn't mean we weren't here. As you understand, running away from Cornwallis and other colonizers, the safest place in Newfoundland would have been in the interior, not on the coastline. And so we all know what happened to the Beothuk people being on the coastline. and their grocery store, in a sense, was the Exploits River and Exploits Bay. And once that got closed down, and they were being shot on site, and everybody knew that. That was a big part of the oral history that we lived with, and we lived with all of our lives. Even in grade 5 history book, a small paragraph that says the Mi'kmaq people at that time were called because they couldn't pronounce Mi'kmaq, were brought by the French to call up antibiotics. A little short paragraph in our history book. And that's as much as we got mentioned in our history. Like Chief Dan George said in his remarks in 1969, I believe, since the centennial, the buffalo was more important in the history of Canada and Aboriginal peoples. Well, in this case, that one little piece, that's what we grew up with. And that's what the colonizers had based this whole fact on, that we were brought by the French to kill all the antibiotic people, which is totally untrue. And that's why we wanted to write this book the way we did.
I did use that same grade 5 history book. I remember that quite clearly. And, it's one of those things that has really stuck. For some reason, people have really taken that to heart. There's been some, recently, there were some Kellyanne Butler and, trying to think of his name, lawyer from Conn River, sir.
Pardon?
The lawyer from Conn River.
Shane McDonald?
No, the other one.
Andrew John?
No, the retired one.
Oh, Jerry Wetzel.
Yes, thank you. Are you folks getting a sense of what it's like writing a book with Chief Joe? Yeah, Jerry Wetzel and Kellyanne Butler and a few others did some research around the whole mercenary myth, and there's no evidence other than what was put in that grade 5 history book, and no documentation to back that up. And it's problematic because when people believe that, and here we are trying to claim our space here and our place on this land, and you have people who believe that we were our background is murderers and that we don't belong here. Unfortunately, that comes forward right up to today, and we experience racism and discomfort based on people believing that and then projecting that onto us as citizens of this province. So hopefully, maybe in reading this, we'll, it will give people pause for thought and to think, well, maybe that wasn't quite the way it was.
Yeah, this for me, it started some time ago when I was asked to be part of the Biotic Institute. I think Phil Warren was the chairperson at the time, I believe so, and Tony Williamson and some other people. And I agreed, and at the time they're putting a statue together, or plans to build a statue that later went out to Wiseco Park. And at one time during one of our meetings, I asked if we would like to go to Scotland to see if we can find the remains of the 2 individuals that was taken from a gravesite. And nobody wanted to do that at the time. And I never forgot that. I continued to think about it. And finally, I got nerve enough to make some arrangements and go to Scotland and to see if I could find the remains. And now, thank God that I had the courage enough to do that, and support from my own community and from businesses around Newfoundland, to be able to go down and not only see the remains, but touch the remains. And now they're back in the province. They're not home yet, but at least they're back on the land where they come from. But surely sometime soon, those remains will go back to where they come from in a rightful place and in a special place and a place of respect. So that basically, from my part, when this whole thing started with trying to find some traces of Sylvester and some stories between the two, if there was any communication other than being called my Indian, and what Sylvester would have taught of Cormac. So, the only way to do that was to, in some ways, rely on my own oral history, what I heard growing up, and to write a historical fiction, a book about those two gentlemen that I don't think liked each other very much until the very end when they sort of said, well, it's now that you're leaving, I'm leaving, it's kind of sad. And probably that's exactly how it went through as well.
Actually, that's one of my favorite lines from the book is the very last sentence. When Sylvester says, I thanked Cormac, but I was ready to finish this journey that I had started months ago. With a little sadness in my heart, I left this strange white man behind. I really like that because I feel it sums up their relationship, that they came together somewhat, unknown to each other. The first thing that Cormac did was so Sylvester leaves Malbegit First Nation, or it wasn't named that at the time, Conn River, and walks to St. John's to see about taking this job. And when he gets there, Cormac says, well, I've got to test you out to make sure you can do this. And he takes him on another walk as a test of his fidelity. And that's the actual title in Cormac's journal. And I believe we've used in the book the test of fidelity as it was very unsettling to me to read that in the journal because I can understand, yes, you want to make sure, but it was long, it delayed their journey. They ended up walking in bad weather, getting late into the fall. So it was poor judgment, I think, in many ways. And from there, they had differences of opinions on things to do and how to make the walk and what they were carrying about medicines and so on. And so we used opportunities throughout to showcase, I guess, or to show how different they were, yet how similar at the same time. Examples being, of course, Cormac writing in his journal and Sylvester using his journey stick for much the same purpose. And so we did a lot of compare and contrast to show similarities, same yet different.
Yeah, it's like during the time the Cormac story was that wanted to affirm caribou, and to bring over. I thought in the book it said Laplanders or people of Finland to herd the caribou, and because he didn't think that Mi'kmaq people was reliable enough to be able to do that or want to do it, or too lazy. I'm not sure what it said, but sort of indicate that it could be done if you had the right people. And even today, I would think that would be probably easier to try and tame a bumblebee or a blue fly than the wild caribou herd that's been on the land longer than anybody else. But that was part of the book that was Cormac wrote, and we tried to reflect on that as we went through it. And at times, I have to admit that after reading this biennium 27 times, from the first one I read till I read the last one, the book would go flying across the floor because it made me so angry, even now. And people have called me that since that, and jokingly, and it always makes me mad and angry. And anything that comes up in my life that's wrong, like sitting behind a student at one time. I know this got nothing to do with the book, but it's all about racism and prejudice in this country. The instructor was saying that he was up in Alberta for a while, and what the student sitting in front of me said, well, did you have a good time with the squaws? And those are times when I almost get violent enough to be able to hit someone, but I calmly said, you're in using that word. This is John, come out of a John Wayne movie, and you're using that language. You're talking about my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my daughter, my wife, everybody, but that's not the word it is. I don't know where the word comes from, but it's a derogatory word. The same as being called Indian is a derogatory word for me. We're not Indians, we're Nihilnu, we're Mi'kmaq. And unless we start to educate the non-Aboriginal people, the colonizers, that'll always be there. we're not going to change what's already there, but we can help to change going into the future. We're younger people.
Now how to follow that. We did, I was really pleased that the repatriation. Very happy that that happened, and it happened actually the day that the World Health Organization declared the pandemic was the day that the repatriation occurred, with the Beothuk remains arriving here in St. John's. And as we were writing, it felt very much like that was tied to this, that you know, Sylvester's quest to keep the Beothuk safe, and then those skulls being taken by Cormac and sent to Scotland for study, and then to have what we believe is a distant relative of Sylvester Joe, Chief Joe, going over to Scotland and getting those skulls brought back to Damguk was very significant and very important. And so we did add a very small section at the very back about repatriation and what that meant to Chief Joe, and how he felt about seeing the skulls for the first time when he went to Scotland. And also some speculation. We wrote a little bit of speculation about what really happened to Sylvester Joe. And in fact, that's led to our second book, which is we're what, about 10 or 12,000 words into right now.
15.
And we are going to pick up the story right from where Sylvester left Cormac on the West Coast, and what happens to him next in his journey. And again, we're hoping that it's going to be very similar, you know, at the junior high, high school, any reader level, and something that will continue the story and continue the teachings, and also continue the authenticity of Indigenous people telling their own stories.
Yeah, and hopefully somewhere along the way too as well, that some of the more from my part now, since we took away education from the church in 1985, we now have very young, well-educated people, and hopefully somewhere along the way, those young educated people will take up the pen and paper and start to tell stories too as well. So this is not just about telling Sylvester's story and Cormac's story, but also trying to encourage more young people, more Mi'kmaq, Aboriginal people in Newfoundland to start writing and telling the stories. And even if they have to do it through, interviewing their grandparents and their elders in their communities, that's one way of doing that. And if we can do this fictional history story starting from nothing at all except Cormac Journal, I think our younger people, smart young people with a good education and PhDs will be able to tell our story the way it should be told and should have been told. And like all across Canada, our history was never written by ourselves. It was always written by someone else. And in most cases, it was someone else writing what the colonizers already said 500 years ago, or done 500 years ago, taking that history and turning it into their own stories, and without even bothering to interview people like my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and even me for that matter. So those are our stories, and whether they be written by me or by other people, as long as they're written by Aboriginal people, I think is important for all of us. And we have to change the narrative. We have to change the way people think about us and our place in history. When you look at our own history, we were deliberately written out of terms of union with Newfoundland Giant Confederation, simply because Joey Small said there was no Indians in Newfoundland. We have no Indian problem. So again, you look at history and how we've survived all of that, and we're still surviving. And we're now writing about our history. To me, that we've come a long ways in terms of how we live and how we want to showcase the world and this country, who we are and what we're all about. We don't live in wigwams anymore, but we think about wigwams. We don't wear skin boots anymore, but I come from a time when my grandfather wore skin boots, and so did I. So it's important to be telling those stories. It's unfortunate for us that we couldn't find enough history on Sylvester Joe to tell a true story about Sylvester, but I think we've come as close to we possibly can in bringing Sylvester to life, even having a marriage ceremony at the beginning of the book, which basically come from a dream that I had about a marriage ceremony. So it's so important to me and to our people that we tell those stories, and we're not trying to rewrite history. That can't be done. History has already been written by so-called scholars and colonizers. We're now writing our own history and the way we want to see it.
I made a couple of notes about things that we wanted to talk about tonight. Obviously, this is an unscripted conversation. Chief, do you think we've covered all of our points? I know that there's going to be time for questions. Or is there other things that you wanted to?
No, I'm fine. I think I've talked myself hoarse.
So perhaps our moderator would allow us to enter into the Q&A portion and see if we can have some interesting conversations.
I could tell you, okay, no, go ahead.
Oh, no questions yet, but if anyone has any, feel free to ask.
Don't be shy.
I say there are two ways to ask questions. One is on the chat line. I'm going to ask if Leah can read some of the questions that are on the chat line, and then just I certainly encourage people who want to make a comment personally to go to the bottom of their screen over to reactions and use the raised hand function. But
Yep.
Leah,
Tammy Barefoot has a question.
okay. Tammy Barefoot.
Unmute yourself. Yes.
Unmute yourself.
Hello. I loved the book. Loved it.
Thank you.
So in the book, it says that Sylvester Joe went to St. John's to meet Cormac. So there was some European establishment here on the island.
Yes.
So how could Europeans use our Mi'kmaq people to hunt and to like use them for guides for discovering and hunting, but they hunted the Beothuk? So like, was it the first contact? The Europeans met the Beothuks first and it was that fear, or but like how could they use one culture to help them, but the other, like, you know, then they hunted the Beothuk, the other culture. So why is that?
I don't know, but from reading the history books that I have, I mean, the first contact with Beothuk people came about from the earlier colonizers that came here with like 1497, and then John Guy and other people that want to set up colonies in Newfoundland. And so that's their first contact, the Beothuk people. And from what I know, it could have been a good, but sometimes it didn't. And in most cases it didn't. And when you get further and further into the history that I know, and I'm not a historian, I'm not a scholar, I don't have a high degree or education, except what my own people tell me, is that they finally got to a point where they're living from their place of along the Red Indian Lake and down the Spice River. If you look at this in the context of the only store you had was a dominion in your community, and somebody stood at the door and wouldn't let you in, you had no place else to go, and if you tried to get in, they would shoot you. So this is what happened to the Beothuk people going into the Spice Bay. That was their summer food. their winter food, and everything they need to survive on. And so not just guns killed them. They're starved to death from being able to get to their own source of food. And so that was part of what I know anyway.
Well, thank you very much, and I can't wait for the second book.
I like your name, Barefoot. Where did that name come from?
Actually, I married my husband because of it.
Okay.
But no,
Okay.
his family is around Pools Island, Wesleyville. His dad is from,
Okay.
and like when I first met him, I said that's the weirdest name I've. But anyway, I've become to love it because. But yeah, that's where they're from Wesleyville, Pools Island area.
Okay. Well, I hope I answered your question. I don't know if Sheila got anything to add to that.
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and Michael Boyle also has a question. He just says, what role? So I'll just have to ask him to expand on that.
Say that again.
Michael Boyle asks, what role? So we'll just get him, if he can unmute himself, he can expand on that question.
Sheila, you want to give this one a go?
Well, we have to wait for Michael Boyle to unmute himself. Michael, can
Yes.
you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can
Yes.
hear you now. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, my question is a general question rather than referring to the book. The whole question of language. It would appear to me that language is really such an important central part of a culture. I'm just wondering, Chief, how do you see the university helping or assisting or having any role in the revitalization of language, which will revitalize the Mi'kmaq culture in Newfoundland?
That's an incredible question. I think that all schools, not just universities or colleges, can play an important role in reviving languages that was outlawed by, and the church too have a role to play in revitalizing language. In our own case, our language was outlawed by one priest in 1920s. And since that time, we've struggled to maintain a language to some degree, which in was we've been gypped with the laws and so we still remember parts of the language. And so we have a chance. And what we need right now is to have the higher education, like the universities and colleges and schools, take this as something that was taken from us and help us to get it back. So return the respect that was taken from us and help us do that.
Chief, I think the same thing happened on the Avalon Peninsula with regards to the Irish language. And
Yes.
the role of the university today is a very minimalistic role that it has for the Irish language. It offers one course, which is not really a full credit course. So these are the kind of things, there's kind of that colonialism. Would you agree that probably still exists at the universities to some extent?
Absolutely, and probably more so than any place else. At least I've ran into, they've been there so long, and they have this idea that the colonialism is a way of life and not going to go away very soon. It's the education of our younger people that will change that. People my age have gone through the system, and I've been preaching this for all my life. But it's going to take people with higher education, people like universities that have the skills and know-how to help do that.
Thank
I
you.
was going to say that there has been some work at the university. I'm familiar with the work of Margaret McKenzie with Inouamwin, and she's done a huge amount of work with language, both the Sheshatshianu dialect and the Nadarashish dialect, and also dialects from Quebec, and developed, there's an online dictionary, there's online other features to what they've been able to do. Sandra Clark has also been involved, and I know Doug Warham has been done a fair bit of work in Inuktitut, and I know there's a lot of stuff going on amongst the Nunatsiavut government. People like Rita Anderson, who recently retired, and they maintain a group of interpreters and and translators, and there is a certain amount of, and of course, as far as the Innu is concerned, the first language of all Innu is Inueman, and that's one of the great benefits of the Innu people in Labrador, that they have maintained their language.
Well, in 1973, Dr. Houston came down to Malgovic and met with an elder, Matty-Jador. And all the words that's in the back of the book are the words that Matty-Jador told him about the land. They're basically land names and animal names.
Yeah.
So we saw fit to put those words in the back of the book, and probably will not. Maybe people from Nova Scotia or other parts of the Maritime would not understand the language. It's a different way of speaking, and our people always said that our language was an ancient language, and so we had even though we understood Mi'kmaq language from everybody else, but our language seemed to be a little different. It was land-based and more ancient.
I was going to ask Leah if you could read the comment that a woman just put up there about a course being offered in Grenfell in Mi'kmaq.
Yes, Grenfell campus recently offered Mi'kmaq through community education as part of a longer goal towards 4-credit Mi'kmaq language.
But then there's also one of the things I've noticed for the general public. There's one of the people that's the keeper of the Mi'kmaq language in Conn River he's on CBC almost weekly, I believe. And I remember they used to do this kind of thing in Labrador, but it seems to not have been continued for some time.
Yeah, I don't know who that is.
No.
Perhaps it's somebody from Halibu. I was going to mention that I do see Ellen is here, Ellen Ford, and I believe it might be Doug Warren, but correct me if I'm wrong, who has been offering Inuktitut at St. John's campus. And Ellen, as a fluent Inuktitut speaker, has been doing, he's doing the technical stuff, and Ellen is doing the language stuff, which I think is brilliant because, you know, getting back to authenticity, to have a native speaker or someone who carries the language and is of the land to be giving the language back is so important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we lost our last fluent speaker going back some time, and he actually speak for hours and not use any English at all. They even had word for like modern things like airplanes and helicopters, refrigerators and telephones. They actually refer to a helicopter as Pedago, and we grew up knowing Pedago was a dragonfly. We never knew he was a dragonfly, but we always called it Pedago.
Yeah.
And but that's what he said. The helicopter reminded him of the Ollie Mi'kmaq. But unfortunately, you know, he got older and he passed away without us realizing what a resource we had in that old man. Like same with my grandfather and my mom and dad. They spoke the language, and you don't realize until they're gone the kind of resource that you're now losing. It's an encyclopedia of our history, our culture, and our identity.
Leah, do you want to try some of the chat line questions?
We've also, first we've got Heidi Coombs has her hand up.
Okay.
So we'll just wait for her to unmute herself and she can ask her question.
And I'm also starting my video because I've been on the other side of the screen and I don't like looking at squares with names. I'd rather see people's faces. So first of all, I want to thank you, Chief Joe and Sheila, so much for, first of all, putting together this book and making it available to all of us, and also for speaking to us this evening about this. This is a really important conversation to be happening because I have a comment and a question, and my comment is about oral histories, and because I'm a historian and I grew up in the tradition of historians go to the archives and they look through the documents and they analyze the documents and they put together the story and that's history. But I became a social historian, and one of the frustrating things is that there's so many people's experiences, historical experiences that are not captured in the archives, and they're not in these historical sources. And specifically in terms of Indigenous history, the sources are all colonial, so they're filtered through a colonial lens. So I think, and this is just a message in general for everybody, that oral history is important and it's valid, and we need to be considering this in terms of rethinking about our narrative, our provincial narrative. Like women's history, working people's history. Very little of that would be found in typical historical sources, but it's rich. These people's experiences are important. So just a shout out for oral history, and more people need to be capturing these stories. And storytelling, I know, is a really important way for education and teaching. So thank you so much for what you've done. My question is more of a detailed question, and it's because I'm Sheila, I think you mentioned something about the medicines that Sylvester and Cormac brought with them. So I'm curious about what those medicines would have been. What would they have needed on their trek across Newfoundland?
I'm going to get you to weigh in on that.
Go ahead.
What medicines would Sylvester have been carrying?
Oh, well, Sylvester didn't carry any medicine really.
Got him as he went.
Sylvester's medicine came directly from he might have had something, but primarily what he had in his medicine bag would have been a little bit of tobacco and some eagle down that would help to, if you got cut, it would stop the flow of blood. And he would have had some other things with him, but primarily Sylvester's medicine come from the land as he walked on. And he also referred to the land as his Bible. He gave him everything that he needed. And the medicine that he had that was readily available on the land at that time would have been alder leaves. It would have been cherry bark. It would have been dogwood trees, all traditional medicines. The ground juniper, as we all know, ground juniper is still used. I mean, people use it to make gin, I think, but our people didn't. They use it for kidney problems and other things like that. So even the beaver, had medicine. They drink the beaver gall, which would have taken away colds and flus if you had one. And I've drank it many times. You go down and you want to come back up. You can try all you want, but it's only a one-way trip. But it keep you from getting a flu and a cold, and we still use that medicine. And in the beaver itself, it's so high in protein that if you're traveling long distance, you would have beaver meat. And the other one would have been bear meat. And of course, bear fat is also still used today for cooking, as medicine. If you're making special medicines, you would always use bear fat for that too as well. So the things that we put in the book was things that I remember growing up using and seeing, and it's there. We still use those medicines today. Not everybody, mind you, because unfortunately people get lazy and they rather go to the drugstore and go get birch bark for coughs or flus. And not everybody wants to drink a beaver gall. Sometimes I don't blame them.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
In the book, Sylvester talks about using a pitcher plant for sore eyes. And so as part of our research, Chief and I went out on the land and found some pitcher plants. And I got a short video clip of him pouring the water from the pitcher plant. And that's one of the, if you look at the study guide, I think it's in the chat. You can get a direct link to that little video clip showing how that can be used.
So medicine was, resources from the land, but also the knowledge of what could be used for treating certain ailments.
Absolutely. Cormac probably didn't realize he didn't care. On that journey, he had someone that would have been equal to a doctor today in terms of the knowledge he had about the land and the medicine that could be used for many things. and I don't know if we mentioned it in the book or not, but turquoise, or we call it blisters on balsam fir, is used to seal a cut, and that's what the eagle down was put over that again to stop the flow of blood. So there's many things that were used that could have been used, and I'm not sure what Cormac had in his bundle, medicine bundle, but Sylvester didn't need to carry it. It was always there with him.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
And Diane Hickey, this is actually more for you, John. She would like to know when the recording will be uploaded to the website.
Well, that's up to Paul, but he usually gets it done within about a week for sure, maybe even as little as a couple of days. So it's best to check the website from time to time. And it probably won't be up, this evening, but you never know. It may be up by the end of the weekend. He does a certain amount of editing. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, Joan Hodson wanted to know how Cormac and Sylvester communicated, and did you get any sense of how his anglicized name came about?
Cormac, I think at that time in Sylvester's life, in 1822, he probably had a good handle on, probably not fluent in English, but enough of English to be able to communicate with Sylvester. But you got to keep in mind, prior to 1610, when the Grand Chief Rimmertu was baptized, people didn't always have two names. That only came about with the colonizers in the church, where people was given two names. And even if you went to church with a child to be baptized after 1610, you didn't always get the name that your grandparents gave you, as it was done back then. It was done by the priest. If you look in our community, people my age, you'll see they all have sort of a biblical name. My name is, in English, Mizel is a translation. My name is Michael. And the Joe name was probably put in place so that government can keep track of us. So Sylvester was not born Sylvester. Sylvester's name came from the church, and was later changed to silver, because silver is Suliawe. It means money, so silver.
Let's see here. Just a moment. Doug Wells is looking forward to your second book. And let's see here. Many compliments. Doug Wells says, very interesting, a great job. Thank you very much. I look forward to your second book and the completion of Cormac's journey and his connection with the South Coast and getting back to Scotland. Anthony Berger says, thank you. Your work has helped change my understanding of our Indigenous peoples and their culture. People saying very nice things. Melissa says, I have gone through so many colonial records regarding the southwest coast of the island. It's important to approach it with the grounded perspective in connection with the land and community. And I'm excited for us all to write and show and share more of our history. And those are all the comments right now, or questions.
Okay.
Oh, excuse me. Jay Thomas has raised her hand.
Okay.
Hi, that's me. Sorry, it's Jocelyn. Hi, Chief Joe. Hi, Sheila.
Hi.
Yeah, it's me. And thank you so much for doing this evening. It's really great to listen to you guys talk about the book, and I can't wait for the second book.
Me either.
So let me know when it's written. So, but yeah, this is fantastic. And from the comments, sorry, I can't remember the name of the lady who just spoke earlier, talking about social history and oral traditions. I second everything she said. Of course, you guys know that as a folklorist by training, oral tradition is so important to what we do in order to spread this information and to maintain, preserve, and disseminate culture. And I'm always a fan when people are able to do that. They can take from their culture and share it with the rest of us, so that we can learn from the perspective of the people themselves, as opposed to imposing it from outside. So Thanks so much for doing this evening. It's just really good to see you both and to hear more about the book and more of your thoughts about the book.
Thank you.
Yeah, can't wait for the next one. Thanks.
Well, I hope you're looking forward to reading it. We hope you're going to read it a few times.
I will, if you'll have me, I will read it multiple times and do my best to help make it the best book possible out there. Thank you guys so much.
I saw a question. I saw a question a little while ago. Did Mi'kmaq people fish? Of course we did. Fish was part of our diet, as like everywhere else. You had fish and you had land animals too as well, whether they come from the ocean or from the inland lakes and rivers. Our diet was pretty. As you look at it today, it was a lot of red meat, a lot of fatty foods, and a lot of fish. That was part of our diet. And when you eat fatty foods, when that's all you have, fat is part of what keeps you going.
All right, so that's all the questions for right now.
Okay. I was going to say that, there is a tradition in Newfoundland and elsewhere too of writing either creative nonfiction or historical fiction. And to some extent, I mean, books that you're probably all familiar with, like Cassie Brown's book on Death on the Ice, there's an awful lot of creative writing in that book, where she makes up dialogue. And I think she did the same thing with the Florizel. And I was listening to actually a CBC Writers and Company with Eleanor Wachtel, and just on a podcast. And this was a woman from Africa. Her name is Bettina Gappa, and she has written a book about David Livingstone's search for the sources of the Nile. And that was broadcasted originally on May 8th, 2020. So, I mean, there is a rich tradition of both historical fiction and creative nonfiction. And you are in a position where, of course, you have to do a certain amount of speculation because the historical record doesn't help you out very much. And you have to rely on oral tradition and on oral history, interviewing and talking to elders and that kind of thing. And as Heidi said, that nowadays it's generally accepted that historians, they have to take care of the historical record. There's no doubt about that. But there's a quantitative historical record where you're counting the number of settlers and where they came from and that kind of thing, or the number of people in a particular area. But then there's also the qualitative, which is often what the written record tells you about individuals and individual events. But on top of that, there's oral history where you have to be interviewing people who can inform you, either as elders or as people who were involved in those particular historical events. It's all part of the technique that's generally accepted by all historians nowadays.
Yeah, well, it would have been difficult for us to write our own history. Yeah. Number one, we didn't write. We spoke Mi'kmaq language, wrote in the language. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until the early 1800s when a priest, a missionary arrived in Lestigouche that translated the language from hieroglyphics to the written language. Mm-hmm. So our people couldn't read and they couldn't write. So we didn't write the stories. So someone had to write them about us, and basically based on speculation of who what we're all about. And it's only now that we're coming into our own and telling our own story. And not to say that we want to rewrite history, but we want to tell history from our own perspective, and not from John Guy's perspective or somebody else's perspective. We have to tell it from our own.
Well, actually, there has been some straight documentary historical work that has that has been very important. For example, the early papers that were written about, penciled out about the discussions around the terms of union, and well, Joey Smallwood's view that they didn't have to really take Aboriginal people into account. In some respects, sounds like, you know, he was trying to do them a favor in his own mind, but he obviously wasn't. And it took decades to recover from that neglect. Not only the Mi'kmaq of Conn River, but the Inuit and the Innu as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all did. And, you know, the funny part of those discussion papers that we found was there was very little discussion about Aboriginal peoples on the island, but more discussion went into keeping the margarine yellow.
Yeah,
and
right.
having us become a fully part of Confederation.
That's a very good. It's a good bit of, you know, documented history. Not in addition to whatever the oral tradition and interviews with respect to people who were around at that time, both in government and outside of government, as to how they felt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And after Confederation, of course, at election time, someone would come around in a longliner. There was no electricity, no anything in Conn River. We were living in pretty poor conditions. He would come close to throw a bottle of screech on the beach and say, "Vote for me and leave." And the men gathered and had a good laugh, and that's about it. You know, I doubt very much if anybody voted for anyone. Nobody knew what it was all about anyway. Certainly didn't know nothing about Confederation.
Just like we've got a few last minute questions.
Okay.
Heidi Coombs would like to know what your favorite story about Sylvester Joe is.
Me or Sheila?
Either.
Both. You start, Joe.
Oh, my name is Mizell, by the way.
Yeah, sorry.
I think my favorite part of the story where Sylvester leaves him overnight and Cormac claims that he was lost. Here's a man that was guiding this man across Newfoundland who never been out. He was the first white man to go out in the wilderness in Newfoundland, and he trusted him to get him that far. Then Sylvester leaves him to go away and do other things, and he thought that Sylvester was lost and left him alone to be on his own. And I think that truly, to me, tells what kind of a person that Sylvester was with in terms of how different they were. And then another story tells where Sylvester fell in the ice, and he goes on to tell a story that because Gabriel didn't help him to get out of the ice, that now Sylvester holds him his life. That's just a myth that somebody made up along the way. I've seen my father falling in the ice in front of me, and he went down out of sight. When he came up, he got up on the ice by himself. And I certainly didn't help him because he didn't need the help. And that was the same thing. So some things in that in the Cormac Journal was just, it's a story that was put there for good reading, probably.
Sheila?
Oh, my favorite part is when, as a young boy, Sylvester's out on the land with his grandfather, and he wakes up and he hears grandfather speaking in a strange language. And, you know, that was a real, like, you know, he's trying to figure out what's going on. He's my grandfather. And I think that is a key part in his development of understanding the relationship between the Beothuk and their own community, and also that his grandfather had a history, and it informs a lot of the decisions that go forward in the book.
Okay, well, perhaps it's been a great pleasure. And it's my great pleasure to thank Sagama Michelle Joe and Sheila O'Neill for their presentation. And I'm sure that we're going to hear a great deal from you in the future with this second book. And I'm sure everybody here who's heard you tonight will join me in thanking you both for your presentation. And we look very much forward to hearing from you again. And one of the best ways you can thank Miss Joe and Sheila O'Neill is to buy the book.